Hey guys, tonight we're slowing down and stepping close to the quiet science of shelter, the humble partnership between earth and fiber, between damp clay and dry straw, shaped by hands that worked without hurry. We'll listen to the soft thud of a wooden tamper in a rammed earth form, the whisking sound of straw being teased apart for cob, and the careful splash of water across a sun-baked adobe brick. We'll notice why walls breathe, how they store the day's warmth and let it drift back at night, and how a smear of limewash can become a kind of skin, thin, chalky, and protective, flashing white in sun and pearl gray in rain. Tonight is about the little habits that made homes last, how to keep water out, how to mend a crack when the seasons shift, how to read the wall with fingertips and know if it's too wet, too dusty, or just right. There's nothing glamorous about clay and straw until you look at them slowly. Under lamplight, a cob mix glows with mossy browns and wheat gold fibers. In a courtyard, adobe bricks line up like sleeping loaves, edges slightly rounded, a faint powder on your fingertips when you lift one. These walls are slower than we are. They thicken with time. They remember storms without complaint, and they murmur back the day's heat like a kind stove. So settle in, breathe easy, and let the quiet craft of survival walls carry you toward sleep.
The mixture begins long before the water hits the clay. You see someone crouched beside a shallow pit, loosening the earth with a hoe that's been sharpened smooth by years of use. The ground is not chosen at random. It's a patch that holds together when damp, that smears rather than crumbles, that feels cool and silky when you rub a bit between finger and thumb. There's a rhythm to testing. A pinch of soil rolled into a snake, bent gently to see where it cracks. A ball pressed in the palm, then dropped from knee height to watch whether it splays or holds its shape. The air smells faintly of dust. Straw rustles like dry rain. Somewhere a half bucket of water waits in the shade. Straw is teased apart, not chopped hastily. Long fibers knit better than short ones, forming a lattice inside the clay body. A child might help here, pulling a twist of straw gently until it springs loose, tossing handfuls onto a clean piece of ground where the mix will happen. The first splash of water darkens the pit. A boot heel works the edges in a slow circle. Then feet, bare or in worn shoes, step into the coolness and begin to tread, toes searching for lumps, heels breaking clods with a soft, patient weight. The straw comes in by stripes, never all at once. It disappears into the clay like yellow thread into dough. Underfoot it changes, from slippery to elastic, from sticky to resilient. When it stops trying to cling to the skin and starts to follow the foot like a gentle companion, the mix is close. There is a sound to good cob that the old hands know. It doesn't squelch, it sighs when folded. You gather a loaf, 2 armfuls pulled up from the edge, turned over upon itself like bread, then tamped with a flat palm into a cohesive mass. A few fibers stick out like whiskers. You trim them not with a knife, but by patting, tapping, and pressing, so the straw beds down rather than being severed. The loaf waits on a canvas or a board, the surface dull rather than shiny, springing back slightly when pressed. The wall that receives this loaf has its own memory. Yesterday's work has firmed enough to bear weight without smearing. It is neither soft nor fully dry, like cheese that keeps a thumbprint but doesn't slump. A shallow score across the top, made with the edge of a trowel or even the fingers, gives the new material a place to catch. Along the outside line, someone stretches a cord to keep the wall true, but no one hurries. The corner is a living thing, the strongest bone of the house, and it grows in braided layers, each loaf staggered so that seams never climb over one another like a ladder. A small wooden mallet taps the loaves into alignment. The sound is hushed, as though the wall itself absorbs it. Moisture is the quiet master here. Too wet and the wall will settle, edges sloughing off like pudding under gravity. Too dry and the loaves won't bond. They'll kiss and then part at the first shifting season. So someone keeps a bowl of water close, dipping fingers, flicking droplets across the working face. In wind, a sheet, old linen, a reed mat, or even a bit of burlap hangs on the sunny side to keep the mix from skinning over. The goal is not speed, but continuity. You add enough height each day that the wall knits into itself, resting at night under the soft hand of evaporating water. Straw, so unassuming, does more than you can see. It bridges micro cracks. It slows shrinkage. It traps tiny pockets of air that damp the wild swings of temperature. In winter, that means the wall never quite chills to the bone. In summer, it means the afternoon heat pauses at the threshold, delayed and diffused by the mass. If you lean your ear to it at dusk, the wall exhales, the day's sun moving back through the thickness in a barely felt drift, like warmth released from a sleeping animal. When rain threatens, the work shifts to protection. Eaves are not decoration, they are the first armor. A generous overhang keeps the worst of the water off the face, and a stone or baked brick plinth lifts the vulnerable clay above puddle splash. If there is no stone, there is ingenuity, a sacrificial skirt of lime-rich plaster at the base, renewed each year, chalky to the touch, beading raindrops for a few seconds before swallowing them and letting them go. The wall does not fear a little water. It fears water with no way out. So the skin must breathe, letting damp pass outward like a sigh. Evenings end with the same carefulness that began the day. Tools are rubbed clean on a scrap of damp straw and hung from a nail. The remaining cob is heaped into a mound, topped with a mat to keep it from drying into crust. A broom, bristles wrapped with twine where they've cracked, leans against the corner. There's satisfaction, but no ceremony. The wall will still be here tomorrow, asking for a little more height, a little more patience, the next braided layer. This is how survival begins, not with grand fortifications, but with a well-mixed loaf laid true to a line, with fibers that stitch the day's work to yesterday's, with a rhythm that matches what the material wants. Clay is slow, straw is patient. Between them a shelter grows that listens to weather and answers softly, not with the brittle snap of cement, but with the forgiving strength of something alive.
Every earthen house begins by learning the oldest lesson of rain. It falls from above, but it returns from below. The wall must wear a big hat, and it must have high shoes. That is the quiet geometry of survival. A generous eave throws a shadow wider than a man's outstretched arm, and a stout plinth lifts the clay out of the splash zone where raindrops rebound like tiny hammers. Between those two, the wall lives in a protected middle world where it can breathe, dry, and endure. Start at the top, the hat. Eaves are no more than shade. They are time-made wood. A long eave slows the wall's aging by keeping most storms at a respectful distance. The rafters step outward like careful fingers, and the underside is lined in simple boards or reed mats that whisper in a breeze. On the outer lip, a drip edge matters more than ornament. a thin bead or a chamfered board that makes water let go, drop, not crawl, so it can fall free instead of curling back under to wet the face. In some places, that lip is a narrow clay tile with a rounded nose. In others, a thin baton of wood pegged neatly and renewed when weather eats it thin. The rule is simple: give rain an easy way down, never an easy way in. Gutters can help if they are friends to the wall and not saboteurs. A gutter that clogs or pitches wrong will pour a river into one unlucky patch of earth, carving a path straight to the foundation. Where people rely on gutters, they keep a small hook nearby, a length of bent wire on a stick, to lift out leaves after storms. Downspouts are sent away, far beyond the wall's reach, into a stone-filled trench that drinks water without letting it rise back. The trench is quiet technology, a line of rubble and washed gravel laid beside the house, wrapped in coarse fiber, covered with earth. It asks for little and gives much, carrying heavy rain to a place where it can seep and rest, not stand and storm. Now the shoes, the plinth. Stone if you have it, burned brick if you can afford it. At the very least, a compacted, stabilized strip that does not pull water up into the wall. People once spent a whole day choosing the first course of stone, not because they were slow, but because they understood capillarity, the sneaking climb of water up narrow pathways. Smooth stones, tight joints, a thin lime mortar that does not invite water to wick. All this keeps the wall's feet dry. In lands without stone, a baked brick curb 2 or 3 bricks high does the same job, its face just proud of the earthen wall, so the inevitable splash never quite kisses the clay. Even simpler, a sacrificial skirt, lime-rich, coarse with sand and straw hair, renewed every season along the base. It takes the rain scolding and flakes away harmlessly, sparing the body of the wall. Doors and windows are where vigilance concentrates. Openings are lovely, they let in light and friends, but they are the weak points. A timber lintel wants a flashing, even if the word flashing is not known. A shallow clay tile course or a thin metal strip tucked under the eave, purned out with a careful bend, shucks water forward like the brim of a hat. Sills need a throat, a slot or groove under their belly so water lets go. A sill that ends in a blunt square will weep back toward the face. A sill with a gentle nose and a hidden drip groove sends water on its way without touching the wall. Around frames, the plaster is back-sloped, not forward-sloped. The simplest little incline keeping damp from pooling. See it in profile, a slight tilt that makes gravity your ally. Because water also rises. Even in dry places, the ground holds a slow, secret damp. The wall must breathe that out, not seal it in. This is where lime earns its place. Lime plasters and lime washes are not merely decoration, they are lungs. A hot mixed lime putty slaked for months, sometimes years, binds sand into a skin that is at once strong and forgiving. Hair or long fiber in the base coats, goat hair, horse tailings, even shredded straw, bridges movement so microcracks knit themselves closed after a light misting. The surface is left open-pored enough to pass vapor outward while still shedding the first rush of rain. Painters speak of lime breath because a properly carbonated lime coat draws in and releases moisture with the weather, buffering the wall's moods. Cement, by contrast, holds its breath. It is hard and tight. It traps damp where you can't see it until a freeze blows the face off or summer heat bakes a hidden blister. There is a rhythm to lime that suits evenings. After the day's dust, someone mixes limewash, lime putty thinned with clean water, some salt to help, a whisper of casein or tallow in old recipes, sifted through a cloth to smooth lumps. It goes on in thin veils, never one heavy coat. 3, 4, 5 passes, each allowed to breathe and take in a little air, each misted lightly so carbonation proceeds without shock. The wall shifts tone with the setting sun, from wet pearl to dry chalk. And in the morning it gleams softly, not glossy. Where color is wanted, earth pigments, ochre, sienna, a faint umber, join the wash in low doses so the surface still breathes. Paths and ground around the house matter as much as coats and hats. A simple apron of compacted gravel or broken tile under a thin layer of sand keeps the splash zone calm. In some villages, a lip of fired brick is set on edge to catch the first raindrops and scatter them safely. A little fall away from the walls, just a few fingers drop in a pace, sends water outward. Where roofs meet, valley flashing is kept clear. Where roofs end, the drip line is kept bare, not planted with thirsty shrubs that hide damp against the base. Chickens help more than rain barrels sometimes. Scratching and flicking, they keep the first meter around the foundation stirred and dry. Climate writes its footnotes. In freeze-prone lands, the plinth rises higher, and lime coats are denser in sand and fiber to endure the push of ice. Eaves run longer to keep snow from stacking. In monsoon places, roof pitches steepen, and gutters grow wide mouths. Reed mats are hung as temporary curtains in wild weather, then rolled and tied when the sky clears. In deserts where rain comes rare but fierce, roofs are rimmed with scuppers that throw water well clear, and the ground is sloped into shallow basins farther out where trees can drink without making the wall a cup. Maintenance is the soul of endurance. No earthen wall asks for perfection, only attention. After a storm, someone walks the circuit, quietly, lazily, but with eyes that know. A finger presses the base coat. If it powders, a new skim of lime sand is brushed on. If a hairline has opened, a damp brush and a little fresh wash persuade it to close. If a downspout misbehaved, it is scolded into better pitch with a wedge of wood. Once a year, before the big rains, the eaves are checked, the drip edge touched, the splash apron raked, the trench cleared. Every small care is a stitch. Together, they make a seam that holds. Inside, the same breath continues. Earthen walls finish themselves in quiet ways, a clay plaster polished with a spoon, a casein wash, a lime skim in the cooking corner, each chosen for places where steam and warmth gather. The wall does not fight moisture, it mediates. Cooking, bathing, breathing, these make damp that the wall absorbs and releases, smoothing the day. To seal it tight would be to stop a lullaby mid-phrase. Better to let the lime hum, to let the wall inhale when the kettle sings, and exhale as the night cools. In the end, water out is not a single trick, but a family of small agreements. The roof promises to throw its shadow wide. The plinth promises to lift. The coats promise to breathe and to sacrifice themselves a little when the weather is harsh. The paths promise to drain. The people promise to look, to listen, and to mend while mending is still easy. Clay, that humble patient, answers by standing, year after year, storm after storm, its strength found not in hardness, but in harmony with rain.
Inside an earthen house, the wall is not a blank surface. It is an instrument, tuned by thin skins that answer touch, light, and weather. Clay, sand, fiber, lime, each can be persuaded to sing a different note. Some rooms want the whisper of a matte finish that eats glare and deepens shadows. Others prefer a soft sheen that glances lamplight around like a bowl of milk catching the moon. Plaster is not only protection, it is comfort, shaped into a thin film, a way to make the wall behave gently toward hands, steam, and time. Begin with the base. A good interior plaster does what roots do. It binds the wall and spreads stress. The first coat, often called the scratch or render, is humble. Coarse sand for tooth, a clay or lime binder to glue everything together, stubborn fiber to bridge hairline movements. It is thrown or pressed on, then scored lightly in crosshatch so the next layer has something to hold. When you press your palm to it after a few hours, it feels like bread dough that has just begun to firm. The print holds, but the surface doesn't smear. In this state, a misting of clean water keeps the chemistry friendly. Too dry, and the next coat will drink its water too fast. Too wet, and the skin will slump. The middle coat is where patience pays. Sand is graded finer here, and the binder just generous enough to keep it together without tightening the pores. If lime is used, it is slaked and mellow, a putty that has forgotten its burn. If clay is used, it is tempered, mixed, and rested so it shrinks politely. You can polish this layer a little with a trowel's back or a wooden float, but you do not chase gloss yet. You chase evenness, a plane that feels calm when you run a knuckle across it. Windows and door reveals are softened to a radius that invites fingers. Corners are tucked with a narrow tool so that no thin edges remain to chip. At sockets, shelves, and pegs, small reinforcements of fiber-rich plaster make nubs of calm strength where daily life rubs and tugs. Top coats, the finish, are where subtlety lives. In a sleeping room, a pure clay finish with very fine sand and a breath of chopped straw gives a dry velvet that swallows noise and light. In a kitchen corner or washing alcove, lime steps forward. A fine lime sand skim, perhaps with casein or soap in ancient recipes, carbonates into a denser, washable skin that still breathes. The tools matter less than the timing. A steel trowel can burnish lime to a soft sheen if you catch it as it sets, just damp enough that pressure compresses the surface, not so wet that you scar it. A flexible plastic blade or the back of a spoon polishes clay without tearing. Some traditions use a river stone warmed in the hand, small circles, patient passes, a low luster rising like breath on glass. Color is a whisper, not a shout. Earth pigments fold into clay or lime as if they were always meant to be there. Yellow ochre for candle warmth, red ochre for hearth corners, umber for steadiness, a tiny sigh of ultramarine or indigo for serenity where people sleep. The aim is not paint that sits on top and seals, but color that is the skin itself. A tinted limewash, layered in translucent veils, deepens with each pass. You stop not when you reach a number of coats, but when the wall stops asking. In certain light, you will see the history of strokes, broad, overlapping, cloud-like, no edges, no harsh boundaries. That is the charm. Surfaces that look made by hands, not machines, that invite the eye to rest. Breath is the law indoors just as outdoors. Kitchens steam, kettles sing, sweaters dry on pegs, and sleep itself makes a little weather. Earthen walls even this weather out if their skins let vapor pass. A sealed latex layer or a cement skim can turn a forgiving wall into a cranky one. Condensation blooms inside instead of dispersing. Salt crystals creep toward the surface, and in winter, hidden frost pushes tiny shelves off the face. Lime and clay do the opposite. They buffer. After a hot bath, the wall inhales. By morning, it exhales, dry to the touch, quiet again. People who live with these skins stop thinking about humidity because comfort simply happens. Repairs are the real art, the proof that a house is a relationship, not an object. A small crack is not a failure. It is a sentence the wall speaks when the season changes. The reply is simple and soft. First, listen with your fingers. Is the edge dusty or tight? A light misting wakes the surface. A brush rub closes microfissures in lime. For clay, a warm sponge and a smear of matching finish rubbed in with a gloved hand makes the line vanish. If a corner has chipped where a basket grazed it one too many times, you widen the wound slightly to a soft V so the patch has shoulders to hold. Then work in a fiber-rich dab, letting it set before the final skim. The rule is like mends like, clay with clay, lime with lime, fibers where movement lives, sand always honest about its size. Deeper trouble, stains or salts or a soggy patch, always points to a story outside the room. A flashing that failed, a gutter that lied, a plinth that got splashed too often. You do not rush to cover the symptom, you court the cause. First, make it dry honestly. Shade, airflow, time. A fan if you must, but gentle. When the wall is cool and even to the touch, the chemistry can be reset. Salts brushed, poulticed with a sacrificial clay-sand mix that draws them out, then brushed away and repeated. Only then do you skim anew, thin, patient, misted, and allowed to breathe. It is slower than modern fixes, but it lasts because you're working with the material's habits, not against them. Furniture teaches the skins where they will be tested. A chairback that always kisses a wall gets a quiet wainscot of harder finish, lime skim with a higher sand ratio, or a casein lime paint rubbed with a cloth to a soft hardiness. Children's rooms accept scuffs as a kind of memory. A quick spring ritual of fresh wash, 2 coats, turns scribbles into a primer for new stories. Niches carved into the thickness, just a hand's breadth deep, hold a lamp or a folded blanket. Their reveals polished like river stones. You can feel the house thinking with you, arranging its surfaces to match the way you live. Light is the final craftsman. Morning sun grazing a clay finish reveals the smallest trowel marks as gentle waves. Candlelight in the evening pools on a lime skim and drifts into the corners. The skins do not glare, they glow. Sound, too, is tamed. Footsteps dull to a hush. Voices knit instead of bouncing. Sleep comes easier because nothing is shouting back. There is a quiet pride in tools kept for this work. A wooden float shiny at the edges, a trowel with its corners eased, a stiff brush cut short for stippling, a splash bucket that always smells faintly mineral. They are not many, but they know their task, and each year they return to it for a few days of mending. Thin coats, careful timing, a steady hand. The house thanks you in its language. Cooler summers, warmer winters, fewer surprises when storms come, and the pleasant habit of walls that invite you to touch them as you pass. The art of repair is really the art of attention. Instead of replacing what is worn with something foreign, you refresh what is there with what it already understands. In an earthen house, this is more than maintenance. It's continuity, a handshake between days. Skins are renewed, breath preserved, and the rooms remain what they were meant to be. Soft, steady, quietly alive.
Earthen walls do not fight the weather. They keep company with it. Clay, sand, straw, and stone together make a memory that is measured in hours instead of minutes. The sun leans on the wall in the afternoon, and the house does not flinch. It simply listens, draws the warmth into its thickness, and releases it back as evening cools. A slow tide, never a wave. This is the secret of comfort without complication. Mass that absorbs, delays, and smooths. If you sat with a thermometer sunk halfway through an earthen wall, you would notice the day arriving late. Outside, heat climbs. Inside the thickness, temperature rises only after a quiet pause. Engineers call it phase shift, how long the wall delays the peak before passing it along. In a modest climate, a 40 to 60 centimeter cob or adobe wall might hold that peak for many hours.
In the hottest places, even more thickness is given, and a courtyard layout shares shade like a communal cloak. The result is a room that never swings wildly. Summer afternoons are cooler by the simple fact that yesterday's evening is still stored in the wall. Winter nights are warmer because the day's sun and the cook fire's breath are being returned gently in the dark. Straw inside the cob does not insulate like a modern blanket. It tethers shrinkage and traps small pockets of air that soften the mass. True insulation, the kind that stops heat's rush, is modest in earthen walls. Their gift is inertia. That is why roofs and openings must help. A tight, well-shaded roof keeps the sun from pouring straight down. Shutters and thick curtains slow exchange at night. When these companions work together, the wall's slowness becomes a virtue. It filters weather the way a forest filters wind. Walk around a house tuned to its climate, and you'll see how people coax mass to do more. South-facing walls in colder latitudes welcome the low winter sun through windows deep in the thickness. The reveals are splayed to catch light and throw it long into the room. In summer, a generous eave shortens the sun's reach, so brightness is admitted without harsh heat. In hot dry lands, windows are narrow and tall, paired with high vents or clerestories that let hot air drift upward and away. The cool drawn from shaded courts and thick-walled rooms like a slow drink. Doors align with alleys of shade to invite breezes, and floor levels step slightly below grade in the coolest room, where the earth's steadiness lends a hand. Floors speak the same language. A well-compacted earthen floor, layers of gravel, sand, stabilized clay, then an oiled finish, becomes a horizontal radiator of comfort. In winter, it absorbs the day's small gains. In summer, it receives the night's downdraft when windows are open to the stars. People in thick-walled houses learn an old habit: purge heat after sunset. You open high windows, prop a door, draw air through until the wall relaxes and the house takes a sip of night. In the morning, you close again, cool, sealed in the mass, like shade in a jar. Corners and junctions are the quiet puzzles. A thin member piercing the wall, say a metal lintel, becomes a bridge that can smuggle heat or cold where it's not invited. Traditional builders avoided this without knowing the phrase thermal bridge. They used timber lintels wrapped in plaster, brick arches, thick stone sills with deep throats, and joinery that kept metal hardware minimal and sheltered. Where wood met cob, they left room for fiber-rich plaster to cushion movement, a small buffer that also stops drafts from threading through a hairline. The house's warmth is not trapped, it is simply eased, like a knot unwound with patience instead of force. Moisture joins the conversation with mass. An earthen wall can hold a whisper of damp within its pores, and by releasing it slowly, soften dry heat or calm winter's tight air. This hydric buffering makes a room feel kind at a wider range of temperatures. You are comfortable at 1 to 2 degrees cooler in winter and 1 to 2 degrees warmer in summer than you would be with thin sealed walls, because the air doesn't scratch the throat or cling to the skin. Lime finishes guide that breath, denser where steam rises, open where bedrooms want to exhale at night. The house becomes a lung, and the wall its diaphragm. No fan noise, only the sound of your own steps. In cold regions that freeze hard, foundations lift the wall above frost and splash, and the base coat of lime grows a little tougher, richer in sand, sometimes stroked to a tighter face to shrug ice. Eaves reach farther, so meltwater drops well away.
Windows pull smaller, placed as pockets of sun instead of broad glass. Yet mass still serves. A winter day of weak light can be collected through a south window onto a dark floor, or a dark plastered niche, and then returned after sunset. People learn to gather heat where it falls. A bench built into a thick internal partition slowly warms while soup simmers and then gives that warmth back while you sleep. In hot, humid places, the aim is different. You cannot store away humidity like you store away a cool desert night, so you lean on shade, airflow, and cool earth. Thick walls confound the midday heat enough that interior courtyards and night verandas remain habitable. The wall's slow pulse flattens the worst spikes, while tall rooms stack warm air above reach. Reed blinds breathe at the openings. Under-eave vents hold screens. The roof stands slightly off the ceiling like a hat held above a brow. At dawn, when air is most forgiving, you flush the house gently, then close the lids half ajar to drift through the glare. Even here, mass is ally, not a freezer, but a muffler. The music of doors and shutters matters more in earthen houses than in thin ones. A shutter that folds into a thick reveal, a door that sits proud of its frame with a soft compress of fiber behind the stop, or a seasonal curtain that drops in winter evenings to create a pocket of warm light. These are small dials you turn to match the day. None of them are gadgets. They are pieces of the wall's temperament, extensions of what mass is trying to do, pace the weather, not chase it. If you look at an old village at dusk, you can read this pacing. Lights come on, but windows often stay dim. The glow is held within thick reveals, not spilling harshly into the street. Outside, the wall tempertates the lane. Inside, it lends its hush to conversation. Sound, like heat, dislikes thickness. It enters and loses heart. Children fall asleep sooner than they do in echoing rooms. A kettle sounds less shrill. Even rain on the roof is gentler, translated by the mass into a soft aggregate murmur. Maintenance keeps the orchestra in tune. A hairline at a reveal receives a breath of new clay finish. A draft discovered at a threshold gets a thin bead of fiber-rich plaster tucked into the joint. A winter curtain is washed and rehung. Once a year, you check the high vents and the low sills, the places where air is meant to come and go, and you make sure they do so on your terms. Mass does the big work. You keep the small promises. At first, this way of comfort seems like an art you must learn. Then it becomes the house teaching you. You begin to anticipate the day. Shutters half across by noon, a jug of water on the sill to cool, the night flush beginning when the first star shows. You know by palm and cheek when the wall is full of sun and when it is lean from a string of gray days. You stop asking the room to jump and you ask it to sway, and it does. The wall does not brag about any of this. It bears scratches, remembers festivals, fades slowly under the touch of years, and keeps doing the same patient trick, catching weather, taming it, and returning it to you unsharp and human-sized. Cold, heat, and time move through it like breath through a sleeping chest. You rest because the wall knows how.
A wall is a field. A corner is a tree. Out in the broad runs of cob or adobe, the work can flow like a song. Loaves folded, faces trued, skins smoothed. But where two walls meet, the house asks for structure, for a braided grip that can stand against wind and time. At openings, the wall pauses to frame light and people. It must carry load around a void without forgetting how to breathe. Corners and openings are not interruptions, they are bones. treated wisely, they give an earthen house its quiet strength. Begin with corners. In cob, edges are not cut sharp and left. They are woven. Each lift, each day's gain turns around the corner like fingers interlacing. Loaves stagger so that no single seam climbs uninterrupted. The joint is a ladder with its rungs crossed, not two boards butted and hoping. Old hands like to say, feed the corner from both sides. That means you do not build one wall to its end and then glue the next onto it. You grow them together, a little here, a little there, so their fibers knit. Where the corner will bear more, say, where the roof's long eave throws extra weight, builders step the corner thicker by a hand's width, an honest buttress that looks like a kindness and is one. Adobe corners learn the same lesson in brick language. Courses tooth into one another. A header from one wall laps into the run of the other. Then a stretcher above reverses the gesture. Even small adobes gain a lion's grip this way. The mortar, or the clay slip binding the bricks, works less as glue and more as bedding, a thin cushion that lets brick faces mate. Too fat a joint becomes a sponge. Too thin cracks on drying. The rule shows in the sound a trowel makes when you tap. A gentle click says the bricks have settled as friends. A dull thud means something is floating and needs a nudge. At the corner's heart lives a post or a lace, depending on tradition. Timber lacing, thin, seasoned lengths of wood set into shallow notches at intervals, gives an earthen corner the ability to shrug a little when the earth moves. In seismic lands, people learned to tie their walls long before the word earthquake was written in a book. A timber ring beam at the top course, strapped or pegged, gathers the corners like a belt. Another at windowsill or lintel height stitches the middles. In some places, cane, bamboo, or rebar tied with wire serves a similar role, but always with the same principle: long, continuous ties that cross corners, never stops that end inside a wall like a finger pointing nowhere. At openings, the wall pauses to carry roof and story load across a gap without pinching the jambs. The simplest answer is a timber lintel bedded over wide, bearing shoulders. Not a single skinny beam, but 2 or 3 planks stacked and let into the wall, their ends well back from the reveal, so the bearing length is generous. Earthen builders love redundancy. If one plank checks with age, the others still carry. Over this lintel, an arch of brick or adobe, shallow and wide, can take shock and spread it. Even when you cannot see it once plastered, it remains as a secret smile, curved, forgiving, easy. In brick-rich regions, the arch itself becomes the opening, a low segment for doors, a tidy jack arch for windows, a true semicircle where height allows. The curve is not for show. It sends weight down the jambs instead of asking the lintel to be heroic. Jambs and reveals are the house's handshake with light. A thin wall makes a mean window, but a thick one can cup the sky. Splay the reveals, wider to the room than to the outside, and daylight spills deeper without glare, while the exterior opening stays narrow and protective. In cold places, the sill slopes toward the sun and carries a deep throat underneath, so raindrops clean. In hot places, the reveal might carry a shallow niche at the top for a reed blind to drop from, or a high slit to vent heat even when the shutter is drawn. The jamb plaster is never left feather thin at the arras. It fattens just a little toward the edge, a teller of knocks that won't chip when a basket grazes it or a latch misses home. Doors are not just holes to walk through. They are thresholds where weather changes its mind. A door set well back in a thick reveal builds a pocket of calm. The step rises above the splash apron. A small stone threshold is bedded like a boat keel, high in the center, throated underneath, so that drafts and damp meet a shape they cannot cross easily. The frame is wedged into the earthen jamb not with nails alone, but with wooden keys driven into pockets and locked by the plaster. If the earth shakes, the frame can move a whisper within its bedding, then settle again without tearing the wall. Shutters are the oldest HVAC. A shutter that closes into the reveal with a soft compress of fiber plaster behind the stop can turn a window from a drafty eye into a snug lid. Hinges sit on heavy timber screws or straps that bite into timber laces hidden in the jamb. You never ask a hinge to hang in pure earth. In summer evenings, shutters pull to half and hold, the slit between leaf and frame drawing air like a narrow river. In winter, a thick curtain falls from a rod set just inside the reveal, making a warm well of air between cloth and wall. A lamp placed there turns the reveal into a gentle radiator. Above, the bones continue, ring beams, plates, and ties. An earthen wall likes to carry weight evenly. Sudden point loads make it bruise. So rafters and joists sit on a timber plate that spreads their effort, a wide beam bedded true along the top, pegged at corners where plates lap and are stitched with a scarf joint. In windy places, diagonal ties descend from the plate into the thickness at intervals, sometimes as stout as a wrist, sometimes as slender as cane, laced in with a clay-rich bedding that grips as it dries. These ties make the wall and roof a team. Gusts spend themselves in the frame instead of prying at the earthen crown. Where walls cross, their meeting is treated like a corner, interlaced, toothed, and tied. Builders avoid letting a partition die into a main wall without a handshake. Instead, they tooth the joint, alternate pockets and tongues, so the partition cannot peel. In large rooms, internal piers thicken at regular intervals, barely perceptible once rendered, but present, like quiet pillars holding the span. Long, uninterrupted walls get a rhythm of these soft buttresses, turning a sail into a line of grounded clothespins against wind. Even the smallest details borrow from the same grammar. A niche carved into the thickness, if it sits near a door, gets a secret arch above its ceiling to carry weight away from the void. A peg rail wants a backing board set into the plaster, not just pegs and skin, so coats and tools pull against timber, not clay. A shelf that runs along a long wall gets more than 2 brackets. It receives a shallow, continuous rib of timber keyed in, the brackets mere fingers on a palm. All this is humility, design that presumes movement, weight, and accident, then answers with forgiveness rather than defiance. Seasons test bones. In the first year, corners may settle a breath. Reveals might open a hairline at the meeting of wood and earth. This is not betrayal. It is the house finding its posture. Repairs here are rituals. A thin, sticky slip of clay worked into the hairline with a brush. In lime, a soft slurry rubbed with a gloved palm until the skin reknits. At timber interfaces, a narrow bead of fiber-rich plaster is tucked into the shadow line, a compress that stays soft inside, hard outside, so the joint can sigh without gaping. Where wind scolds a corner, a little more lime in the exterior finish tightens the face. Where sun bakes a reveal, a lighter pigment and a gentler sand prevent overdrying and checking. In lands where the ground itself has a voice, tremor, jolt, long-rolling hum, earthen houses wear extra belts, courses of timber lacing at sill height, lintel height, and plate height, vertical ties at corners and beside openings,
lighter walls above the waistline, or a frame and infill hybrid, a timber skeleton with earthen panels that can sway as one. The principle remains constant: distribute, tie, relieve. You will see metal straps in modern work, but the idea is old and simple. No stiff, isolated member that
Every durable wall begins long before clay meets straw. It begins with listening to the ground. Quiet work with stakes, string, a spade, and patient eyes. Earthen houses are light compared to stone keeps, but they are broad and breathing, and they want a base that drains, lifts, and leads water away. The ground can be generous or sly. If you read it well, the first row will be honest, and the rest of the house will follow that truth for decades. Start with the walk, not around the site, but through the weather that shaped it. A low place that stays green late into summer often stays damp after storms. A bare patch that bakes to cracked tiles might be clay that swells in rain and shrinks in drought. Watch where last winter's puddles lingered, where grass tufted into islands, where ants build mounds, they prefer drier runways. Notice how the wind usually moves, and where the sun first falls in the morning. Shade from a hill or a clump of old trees can be gift or grievance depending on your winters. This is site selection without a single instrument, an old craft of noticing. Then test in hand. A simple jar test says much. Half a jar of site soil, water to near full, a pinch of salt to help flocculation. Shake and let it settle. Sand drops first, then silt, then clay, bands you can measure with a finger. If the clay band is thin, your foundation trench will drain well, but need care to keep from raveling. If the clay band is thick, you must respect expansion and hold water away like a jealous cook guarding a pot. Squeeze a damp handful. If it polishes and holds a sheen, clay is strong. If it crumbles gritty, sand leads the dance. Neither is enemy, but each writes different rules for the first row. Set the house in your mind with simple geometry. Batter boards at the corners, strings stretched taut at wall lines, a diagonal check to square. The datum, your chosen elevation, should stand above the highest remembered puddle and comfortably above surrounding grade so that the house looks out, not up into a ditch. Old builders like to lift their thresholds a palm and 2 fingers above the lane, more in snow country, less where porches run deep. A long level or a water level, a clear tube with water between 2 staffs, humbles fancy tools. It reads level over distance like a lake does. Drainage comes before digging, which sounds backwards until you've seen a trench become a moat. If the site slopes, plan where rain that you interrupt will go. A shallow swale or a temporary diversion ditch, caught a few paces upslope, keeps your trench from filling with a storm's impatient runoff. Lay out the trenches only when the weather will be kind for a few days. Old hands watch for the drift of mare's tails and the feel of the air to judge this. If the clouds gossip, stack tasks differently and prepare stone and gravel while you wait. For earthen walls, the foundation carries 2 priorities: stop vertical wicking and spread weight broadly on honest ground. The classic answer in many traditions is the rubble trench, a narrow, deep slot down to firm subsoil, lined with permeable geotextile or even coarse straw in older times, filled with clean stone, no fines, no sand that would turn it into a wick, all the way up to just below grade. At the bottom of the trench, a drain,
Tiles in a bed of gravel, or a pipe with generous holes wrapped in cloth falls gently toward daylight or a soak-a-white pit far from the house. The trench is not a canal. It is a sponge and a roadway for water to leave. When it rains hard, you will hear it whisper, tiny channels rushing deep where you cannot see. Above the trench rises the plinth, the high shoes, stone if you can beg, borrow, gather, or buy it, burned brick if your land is clay-rich and kilns are near, lime-stabilized, well-compacted earthcrete or rammed gravel lime where both stone and brick are scarce. A good plinth is honest in 3 directions. It stands plumb, it is wider than the wall by a thumb or 2 to catch errant drips and cast them down, and it lifts the vulnerable earthen wall far from splash. In frost soil, the plinth and its trench sit below frost's meddling reach. In termite lands, a metal or stone shield breaks the secret stairs insects love to climb, its lip turned out so invaders are forced into the light where sharp eyes and chickens find them. In damp valleys, the plinth may rise to a knee before the first earthen course begins, a belt of mineral under a body of breath. Mortars matter. Between stones or bricks in the plinth, lime is kinder than cement for this kind of house. It is strong enough to hold, soft enough to move, and it shares breath with the wall above. Cement can trap damp, turning capillary creep into a hidden menace. Lime shrugs, dries, and forgives. Joints are kept thin and packed, faces dressed so they shed water like fish scales, each stone's upper lip projecting a hair over the one below, encouraging drops to leap clean. You will see old plinths with a subtle batter, sides leaning out a whisper toward the base. That geometry is not mood, it is physics. Lower weight, wider stance, better at refusing splash and shrugging ground heave. Utilities are not afterthoughts. They are holes to be honest about from the beginning. Sleeves for water lines, conduit for power, a path for a drain, all should cross the plinth with clear throats, sloped to shed, and room to pack breathable material around them. A pipe wedged into clay is a perfect wick. A pipe sleeved through stone and tamped with lime sand is a dry traveler. Where radon is a local ghost, a ventilated layer under earthen floors and a path to daylight keeps the unseen moving out and away, not up into rooms. Now comes the ritual of the first row. Whether you are laying adobes or beginning to lift cob, the first contact between earth and the house's shoes sets the tone. The working face of the plinth is dampened, not wet, just cooled and readied, so that it doesn't rob water too greedily from fresh clay or mortar. A thin slip is your translator. For adobe, a slurry of clay and water brushed on the plinth. For cob, a tacky paste pressed into tiny hollows so that straw and stone find a handshake, not a handshake and a fight. With adobe, you set the first course slightly proud of the plinth's outer edge, never flush, so that rain running down the skin falls past the foot, not into it. Joints are tight, filled, and kissed true with the edge of a trowel. With cob, you bed a generous fiber-rich starter that takes the imprint of stone like dough takes a baker's hand. Then you begin the lifts, smaller and more deliberate than they will be higher up, pinching and tapping until the loaves feel locked to the base. Level is not a number, it is a feeling in the bones of the house. Strings stretched along the wall lines give you a horizon. A long level rides a straight edge to read bumps and hollows across the first course. You resist the urge to make perfection with one heavy correction. You prefer a dozen feather-light adjustments. Tap, press, cut a whisper, add a sliver. Old masons say the first row is the cheapest insurance the house can guy. They are right. A level and true first row means every door will swing kindly, every window reveal will sit without a wedge, and 1,000 small problems will never be born. Width speaks softly but decisively here. Earthen walls often begin wider at the base than at the eaves, a soft batter that may be only a finger's taper every few courses, invisible to the casual eye, but deep in the wall's posture. That spread anchors mass without asking more of the foundation than honesty. At inner corners, thicken a touch. At long runs, consider a discreet pier folded into the thickness every few paces, future shoulders for beams, present breaks against wandering load. Weather is the other foreman on this day. If sun scorches, you shade the first course so it doesn't skin and crack before it bonds. If wind pulls, you hang burlap or reed screens to break its appetite. If rain threatens, you do not rush to cover the first course in plastic. You wait, you tent loosely, you let air move so that drying is even. Earthenwork fears suffocation more than drizzle. A small awning over each active corner buys you hours when clouds are fickle, and it is often at corners that pride does its work.
Walls endure because roofs tell rain the truth. A good roof does not argue with weather. It receives, gathers, and gives it back to the ground in orderly ways. In earthen houses, the roof is not an afterthought pasted on top. It is the first line of compassion for clay. Thatch and tile, wood and reed, ridge and valley, eave and drip. Each part has a small job, and together they make a quiet umbrella that lets the walls breathe and last. Begin with pitch, the roof's posture. Thatch likes a steep lean, often 45 degrees or more, so water races down the stalks before it can think about creeping inward. Clay tiles can relax a little, though still prefer a slope generous enough to discourage standing water. Where snow is heavy, the pitch grows keener. Where wind runs hard, the edges are tucked and tied. Pitch is the first mercy. Velocity keeps damp from lingering and drying. Thatch is not a haystack. It is a woven skin. In reed thatch, each bundle is a brush, laid with the butts out, the smooth cut ends facing the rain, the feathery tops hidden within. Water streams along the shiny cylinders and drops cleanly off the verge. In straw thatch, the craft is similar, but the fibers are softer. The coat must be thicker, the fixings tighter, the renewal sooner. Fixings matter. Hazel spars twisted through laths, tarred twine in old sea towns, modern stainless hooks where storms test courage. The coat thickens toward the ridge, each course covering the heads of the one below, like shingles of grass. At the eave, a precise line is dressed, so drips drop free of the wall and splash apron. A sloppy eave is a wall's undoing. Tile speaks a different grammar, small ceramics arguing politely about how to overlap. Flat tiles, plain tiles, demand good head laps and side laps, each course stepping so joints never align. Pan tiles with their lazy S-wave, cradle and crest, channeling water in modest streams. The point is always the same, no straight, continuous path for water to sneak. Beneath, battens lie true and evenly spaced, fixed to rafters that are deeper near eaves where weight and weather press. A simple, breathable underfelt may hang like a cool shade, an extra courtesy that discourages wind-driven rain from rattling under tiles. Yet it must not become a plastic bag. Earthen houses need roofs that exhale. Ridges are not just lines in the sky, but lids. A thatch ridge is often dressed more tightly, sometimes in a different pattern, block, wrap-over, flush, tied against the devil's fingers of wind that always search there. A tiled ridge gets special pieces, curved and bedded in a lime mortar that can flex a breath and still hold.
Lime again, not cement, where breath and slight movement are expected. At verges, the gable edges, thatch is stitched and combed. Tiles get barge boards or a neat overcloak course so wind cannot peel and creep under. Valleys concentrate weather. Two roof planes meeting in a V make a hush where water gathers to rush. Thatchers thicken the coat into a swept valley, curved and smooth to guide the flood. Tilers set valley boards and lay carefully cut tiles, or fit lead, copper, or fired clay valley pieces so that the stream never finds a seam. Step flashings at abutments, where roof kisses wall, become a rhythm. Tile, flash, each one lapped into lime bedding, each one promising to lift the stream and move it along, not under. Eaves are the roof's good manners. They must project far enough to cast a true shadow, and they must end in a clean drip. On thatch, the eave is dressed to a crisp line. On tile, a projecting course with a slight undercut encourages water to let go. A fascia board can be plain and stout, a soffit ventilated in small, shy holes that admit air without inviting birds. Airflow under the roof keeps the deck sweet. Damp, still air is rot's lullaby. Gutters and downspouts are helpers with tests. They must be pitched, cleared, and led away, always away. A gutter that overflows is a wall's enemy. A downspout that ends in a splash at the plinth is treachery. Earthen houses like a stone-filled trench or a run of pebbles at the drop, a chain to soften fall, and a swale that escorts the water to a garden bed or soakaway well beyond the splash zone. In adobe towns with parapets, gutters become canales, spouted mouths through the parapet that spit rain far from the base. Below them, a stone patch receives the blow. Parapets get their own hats, copes or drip caps in clay tile or stone, and a lime coat turned up under the cap so water never lingers in the top of a wall like a note held too long. Chimneys and flues are roof's confessions of fire. Where the flue pierces the thatch or tile, flashing becomes exact work. On thatch, the flue emerges in a little island of tile or a tight lime mortar collar, with a generous distance and a spark arrestor, a fine mesh crown that breaks ember's flight. On tiles, step flashings tuck neatly, a saddle flashing on the high side, all in materials that last and that flex, lead, copper, or modern equivalents, bedded in lime, dressed without sharp creases, left with expansion room so they do not tear as seasons move. Fire and thatch are old acquaintances with rules. Chimneys are brushed in their season, sparks are tamed by caps, stovepipes do not kiss thatch without sleeves and space. Lightning conductors in storm-prone regions give the sky a polite path to ground. Hearth smoke, if allowed to wander under thatch, will gently tar and toughen the underside over years, a black sheen that some say resists wet. Yet that same smoke can invite rot if the thatch is tight and the weather is still, so vents and trickles of air are kept honest along the ridge. Inside, the roof's frame is the house's timber skeleton, rafters like ribs, purlins like quiet spines, a ridge that is more a handshake than a spear. Joinery that shrugs rather than snaps is preferred, pegged mortise and tenon at the plate, birds' mouths that sit sweetly on beams, scarf joints that share load across generous overlap. Where winds gnash, diagonal wind braces keep the planes from racking. Where quakes mutter, ties lace the frame so it breathes as one and does not jab at earthen crowns. Rain is not the only weather a roof keeps. Sun is a stern visitor. In hot lands, a ventilated roof, space between outer skin and ceiling, high vents in gables, pale tile or thatch thickness, turns noon into a patience game the house can win. In cold lands, snow is both weight and water in waiting. A steeper pitch sheds, laths and battens are stout, and eaves lift high enough that drifting piles do not bury the drip line against the wall. Icicles tempt pretty. They also confess a heat leak, so the ceiling under the roof is tight, and the mass of walls does its evening work while the roof keeps melt honest. Maintenance is ceremony, not crisis. In late autumn, someone climbs with a soft broom and clears leaves from valleys and gutters. In spring, a careful hand combs the thatch where birds have tried to tuck homes and where wind has raised a tuft. A tile that has crept is nudged home. One cracked is replaced without drama. Lime at ridges is renewed in a thin, lively skim that fuses with the old and dries to quiet chalk. The roof asks for a few hours, a ladder, and attention. In return, the walls get years. You can hear the health of a roof when rain begins, a kind patter, no thudding waterfall at one spot, no splatter too near the base. Cultural habits wrap these same physics in different clothes. In the monsoon belts, deep verandas run like eyelids around the house, taking the first lash of rain while the main walls rest back in shadow. Roofs there are bolder in overhang. Scuppers throw water far, and the ground is graded into basins where trees can drink the roof's gift. In high deserts, parapets top flat or gently sloped roofs. Canales are set frequent and proud, and the plastered crown of a wall gleams with fresh lime before each wet season like a polished shield. On seacoasts, thatch grows thick and low, edges stitched like sailor's canvas, and tiles are wired to battens so gales cannot steal them. The gestures differ, the principle remains. Keep rain moving, keep air moving, keep the drop honest. A quiet trick loved by old builders is to make the roof teach you. A chain set at the eave reveals the flow in a storm. A small stone dish.
An earthen floor is the house's slow heartbeat, quiet, steady, forgiving underfoot. It is not simply dirt tamed, it is a layered conversation between ground and room, made of patient compaction, careful moisture, and finishes that learn your footsteps and grow kinder with years. People who live with such floors forget shoes first. The floor carries their day with a soft drag on heels and a hushed reply to each step. Cool in summer shade, mellow warm in winter evenings after sun and stove have spoken to it. Begin below sight, where success is decided. The ground is leveled to an even plane and tapped until it no longer sulks under the rammer. A capillary break comes next, a course of clean, washed gravel that will not wick water upward, no fine dust, nothing that would turn the layer into a sponge. In places where damp prowls, a ventilated path out is laid, a small underfloor channel that leads to daylight, or a radon, soil gas vent in lands where that invisible guest must be ushered away. Above the gravel, some builders favor a thin layer of coarse sand to bed the next course like a cushion. Others go directly to a lean, stabilized layer, gravel and lime, or soil with a little lime or pozzolan, rammed into a firm cake that lifts the floor away from ground moods. Now the earth that you will meet as a surface begins to arrive, not by wheelbarrow alone, but by test. The recipe is local, a soil with enough clay to bind, enough sand to stand, and a whisper of fiber to settle shrinkage. A handful squeezed should hold shape and shine a little without smearing like butter. Trowels, rammers, and patience do the rest. The base lift, often 3 to 5 centimeters, is laid damp and firm, compacted until the rammer's note rises from thud to tight rasp.
You do not chase flatness with one heavy pass. You build it with many light ones, working from edges inward, from high spots toward low, misting where the surface dries too fast, shading where sun hunts for cracks. Edges and thresholds are the floor's truth-tellers. Where the earthen skin meets a stone step or a wooden sill, a careful joint is made, a thin slip of clay-lime bedding that bonds without wicking, a soft radius rather than a sharp arris that would chip the first time a bucket kisses it. Around posts and hearths, the floor thickens a breadth, reinforced with fiber-rich mix, so that daily knocks don't bruise. In rooms where water will visit, by a wash basin, near the entry, builders sometimes lay a narrow apron of brick or stone set flush with the earthen finish, an honest welcome mat that takes mud without complaint and keeps the delicate surface from being asked to do a boot's work. The finish lift is a finer music, the same soil sifted, the sand grated smaller, the fibers shorter or even absent if the clay is strong. This coat is laid thinner, often 1 to 2 centimeters, and treated like a living skin. Trowels glide when the moisture is right. They drag when too dry and scar when too wet. You learn the sound, the whispering scrape that means the surface is closing, the soft squeak that says it's ready to be kissed smoother. Some polish with steel trowels, others prefer a plastic blade or a river stone warmed in the hand, circling and circling until a low luster blooms, like the sheen on worn leather. Corners receive a gentle radius. Doorways are eased so grit does not make a grinding ledge. Curing is the quiet miracle. The floor wants weeks, not days, sheltered from drafts, shaded from harsh sun, misted lightly to prevent too fast thirst. You walk on planks at first, then in socks, then, at last, barefoot. Each stage an agreement with the clay as it trades its wet strength for dry. Only when the surface is firm and evenly colored do oils arrive, boiled linseed, tongue, or blends, sometimes with a little citrus solvent in old recipes, sometimes warmed to flow. Oils soak down and polymerize, stitching particles into a tougher skin that still breathes. The first coat glugs in, the second drinks slower. The third sits more on the surface. A final wax, beeswax with a touch of soap, or a harder floor wax, can be buffed until the room glows softly from below, not shiny like varnish, but calm as river stone. Comfort is not only warmth or coolness, it is the feel of air. Earthen floors take part in the wall's slow breathing. On a summer afternoon, a shaded room with a floor that has seen the night will feel like a cellar without damp, cool to palm and cheek, unclingy to skin. In winter, a low sun captured through deep reveals lays a warm path across the floor that lingers after the light moves on. Some tuck radiant heat pipes in the stabilized layer, low-temperature water, slow and even, turning the whole floor into a gentle stove that suits mass. Others keep it simple, a thick rug and seating corners, a kettle resting on a heavy trivet that preheats a patch to the delight of cold feet. Furniture teaches the floor where to be toughest. Chair legs get felt feet. Heavy cupboards sit on timber skids that spread weight like snowshoes. The spot where people pivot, at a sink, by a stove, might receive an extra rub of oil every season. In children's corners, scratches are not crimes. They are the first drafts of memory. A damp cloth and a warm hand can heal many small marks. Rehydrate the scar a breath. Rub a little fine slip into it. Trowel with a spoon's back
and dab oil when dry. In larger repairs, you honored the rule of like with like. Patch with the same soil, same sand, same dance of water and pressure, and you feather edges so the eye never catches a seam. Cleanliness is simple ritual, not chemicals. Grit is the enemy of luster, so brooms with soft bristles are friends, and a weekly sweep keeps the surface kind. A slightly damp mop with warm water and a dash of gentle soap pleases the floor. Flooding does not. If a shiny patch dulls where boots parade, a quick seasonal oiling there, and only there, keeps the whole room from being asked to drink when not thirsty. Once a year, before the big holidays or the rains, the wax comes out for a light buff. The smell, linen oil, beeswax, a little citrus, becomes part of the house's signature. Special rooms write their own footnotes. In a pantry, you might choose a denser finish rich in lime and fine sand, so spills wipe easily. In a bath alcove that sees splashes, a shallow lip of stone or tile arrests water before it can wander, and the earthen surface just beyond is left a shade more open so it dries quickly. Near an entry, a boot brush and a pebble tray remind shoes to shed their day. In workshops where sparks may fly, a stone hearth pad stretches wider than habit to teach caution by its size. The surrounding floor, oiled well, shrugs small embers that cool before they can bite. Light loves these floors. Morning grazes reveal the trowel's faint waves like gentle ripples fossilized in clay. Evening lamps collect in the wax and drift outward, making a small sea of glow at ankle height that calms the room. Sound loves them too. Footsteps damped, voices softened, a dropped spoon clinking like a polite bell instead of a shout. Pets approve. So do knees, and the habit of sitting on the floor returns without ceremony. A cushion, a book, a nap you didn't plan. Not every soil says yes. Some sites are so sandy that binders must be corded, more clay imported, or a lime-stabilized base carrying a thin clay wear layer on top. Some are so clay-rich that shrinkage needs diplomacy. More sand, more patient curing, fibers cut finer. Cold, wet ground asks for a higher floor and a more generous capillary break. In floodplains, wisdom may be to lift the house rather than brave water's temper. Earthen floors are practical, not stubborn. They thrive where they can breathe and where you partner with water, not pretend it isn't there.
A house lives by the little things you notice before they become large. Earthen walls are generous. They tolerate neglect longer than they should. But their longest life comes from minutes, not months. A brush here, a handful of slip there, a thin veil of lime before the big rains, a gutter cleared while the storm still grumbles far away. Mending the skin is not an emergency craft. It is the slow habit of guardianship, learned in shoulder seasons when the light is kind and the breeze carries the faint mineral scent of fresh plaster. The first rule is to see. After weather, walk the circuit, not with a frown, but with a cup of tea and the intent to admire. Your eye will still catch what needs doing. At the base, look for splash freckles on the lime skirt. If speckling climbs higher than a handspan, the drip edge is shy or the ground has settled. At corners, glance for hairlines that open where sun bakes one face more than the other. At reveals, run a fingertip along the arras to feel whether the skin is still tight or chalking. Under downspouts, the soil tells on you. A small crater means the stream is punching too hard. A damp patch that lingers into noon hints that water is loitering at the foot. These are invitations, not scoldings. Before any repair, Make it clean and make it honest. Dust is the enemy of bond. A soft brush flicks away powder, and a slightly stiffer brush lifts grime where hands have loved to rest. If a patch is greened by algae in a rainy year, a gentle wash, warm water, a dash of vinegar or alcohol in old recipes, no harsh soaps, restores the lime's dry brightness. For soot at a kitchen corner, let the wall teach you how much it will release without force. Rubbing too hard polishes some finishes the wrong way. When a patch is clean, test its thirst with a misting bottle. If water beads, wait or roughen lightly. If it vanishes in a blink, pre-wet in 2 or 3 passes until the surface drinks politely and leaves a dark bloom rather than a run. Tiny cracks, the ones that look like dried riverbeds in a mudflat, often close by ritual more than material. For lime finishes, a thin limewash worked briskly across the hairlines with a soft brush persuades their edges to re-knit as the wash carbonates. For clay finishes, a fine slip, the color of the room, clay and water sieved through cloth, rubbed with a gloved hand and polished with the back of a spoon, makes the lines exhale and disappear. The trick is moisture and timing. Too wet and you make a scab. Too dry and you dust. Work in shade, be patient, and let the wall tell you when to stop by turning from wet pearl to matte. Where the skin has chipped, at a busy doorway, along a stair, open the wound before you close it. Feather the edges to a shallow V so the new work has shoulders to hold. If the base is lime, mix a small batch of base coat plaster, lime putty, coarse sand, a breath of fiber, goat hair, horse, even a whisper of chopped straw. For clay, the same logic holds. Clay body, sand grated to match the old, a little fiber. Pre-wet, then press in the patch with a small float, compacting rather than smearing. Let it firm to leather, and then lay the finish, a finer coat that you burnish just enough to match the old sheen. Matching texture is half the art. If the wall is softly floated, don't polish the patch to a glass. If the wall is glossy for years of spooning, don't leave the patch dull and thirsty. When in doubt, stop a shade less perfect. A month of living will blend the rest. Edges at wood are their own climate. Timber swells and contracts. Earth answers more slowly. That is why the old rule, soft between wood and wall, exists. If a hairline opens along a lintel or frame, resist the temptation to caulk with hard fillers. Instead, tuck a narrow bead of fiber-rich clay or lime plaster into the shadow line, pressing it so that the outside skin set firm while a tiny core stays a touch soft. This is a living gasket. Later, when the season turns, the joint will flex within itself instead of tearing the finish. A thin veil of wash over the bead softens the seam into the rest of the face. Water scars teach you to follow causes upstream. A coffee-colored bloom in the plaster often means tannins from timber have wept after a bad storm. A gray, furry patch may mean salts migrating where damp stayed too long. Do not paint over either. First, cure the leak, sharpen the drip, adjust the gutter, thicken the eaves shadow, renew the parapet cope, or ease the splash apron so the base dries between rains. Then pull salts with a poultice, a sacrificial clay-sand mix, or even clean dampened paper pulp, pressed over the bloom, allowed to dry, then brushed off. Repeat until the ghost lightens. Only then do you skim anew. With tannins, let the timber dry fully, and if the streaks are stubborn, a thin wash with a bit of casein can lock them before the final lime veil. Lime wash is both repair and ritual. In many places, the whole village dresses its walls just before the wet season.
The mixture is simple. Mature lime putty, thinned to milk, filtered, perhaps with a pinch of salt or alum, perhaps with a breath of tallow or casein, plus earth pigment if color is tradition. It goes on as veils, not coats. 5 thin passes beat one heavy one. Between each, mist lightly so carbonation proceeds gently. You will see the wall drink and pale, until it stands with that soft chalk that keeps rain honest and lends dusk its kindness. Limewash does not hide sin. It forgives it, evens it, and makes the next year's forgiveness easier. Inside, the mending is quieter still. A scuff at ankle height near a chair, warm water, a thumb of slip, a spoon's back, a drop of oil when dry. A child's drawing that leapt the paper. Let it live until the season after, then wash tenderly or skim. Walls are diaries, and not every page needs erasing. Near a stove where steam and soot conspire, a denser lime skim, higher in sand, polished a hair more, resists mischief and cleans with fewer words. If a corner is forever bullied by baskets and elbows, a low wooden angle fixed into the plaster and whitewashed with the wall turns abuse into patina. Tools for small repairs are humble and pleasant to hold. A stiff brush cut short, a soft brush wide as 3 fingers, a spray bottle that mists rather than spits, a narrow trowel with eased corners, a wooden float that shines from years of touch, a spoon that no longer stirs soup. Keep them in a small basket with a cloth over the top. If the basket is easy to carry, you will mend more often and with better temper. Keep a jar of matching clay slip and a little tub of lime putty the way others keep flour and salt. Replenish them when you do the big grocery run for sand, fiber, and patience. Mending also happens at the roof line. The best plaster repair is a leaf pulled from a gutter before it births a waterfall against the wall. The second best is a valley cleared so it doesn't become a canal for silt that stains the parapet. At the base, rake the gravel apron so splash is honest. Top up the pebbles where feet have made hollows. Make sure downspouts leap into stone and not into soil that will sip and lift damp up the plinth. The skin's health begins an arm's length above and an arm's length below itself. Season writes the schedule. In spring, when the air is soft and the sun not yet sharp, you walk, wash, and wash again, gentle, thin, renewing. In high summer, you patch early or late. You shade fresh work and mist like a gardener coaxing seedlings. In autumn, you dress eaves and ridges, check flashings, comb thatch tufts where birds have played, and lay a last quiet lime veil if needed. In winter, you listen. You mark where icicles form and where melt lingers. Those notes become spring's to-do list. Sometimes a scar is too proud to hide in one day. A larger hollow where a cartwheel kissed the wall, a wide scrape where a branch insisted during a gale, these want stages. You build back in thin lifts, each keying to the next, each allowed to firm before the next arrives. In clay, rest between lifts is measured in hours to a day. In lime, in days to a week, depending on weather. Do not be lured by speed. The wall's strength is cumulative.
There is a kind of weather that doesn't belong to the sky. It belongs to the house. Courtyards, porches, loggias, arcades. These are the rooms where the interior spills a little outdoors, and the outdoors is trained to behave. In earthen settlements, this middle weather is how walls are protected without being sealed, how air is moved without fans, and how light is invited without glare. The courtyard collects shade and sets it to work. The porch catches rain before it can quarrel with the base of the wall. The arcade leads wind gently along the edges of rooms until it forgets to be a draft.
In hot, dry places, the courtyard sinks a step or two below the lane, and the house rises a touch above it. In damp greenlands, it may be level, but given a barely perceptible fall toward a discreet drain under a patch of pebbles. The floor is never bare mud. It is paved with brick set on sand, stone flags that have learned the feet of ancestors, or beaten earth hardened with lime and oil. The center is left simple, no clutter to block the night's cool air when you open high windows to purge heat. A tree, if there is one, is chosen for manners. Leaves that give dapple and move with a whisper, roots that respect walls, fruit that can be forgiven when it falls. Shade is the first ingredient of courtyard weather. High, deep eaves on the inner faces of surrounding rooms cast shadows that rotate like careful clock hands. A reed mat can unfurl from a beam to extend the shade at noon, then roll up to let evening fall into the space. Cloth awnings appear in season, laced to hooks set in timber plates, their edges given little scallops that keep rain from committing to a single drip. In older towns, vines do the same work with a grace that repeats each year. Grape over timber, wisteria along a cord, the green roof living and changing and humming with bees. The walls beneath enjoy this spare kindness. Limewashes last longer where light is filtered and faces are not scalded. Air is the second ingredient of courtyard weather. Courtyards are lungs, but lungs need a rhythm of inhale and exhale. In the afternoon, hot air climbs out of a courtyard if given a path. At dawn, cool air settles into it. Builders tuned this by geometry. A small, high opening on the leeward side lets warm air escape. A shaded opening low on the windward side admits cooler air. In some lands, wind catchers, badgears, rise like tall ears above roofline, scooping the gentlest breeze down into the courtyard where it fans across a shallow pool or a damp mat hung in shade before returning up through a high slit in the opposite wall. Even without towers, a humble trick works. Clay jars kept cool and damp under the porch, their surfaces breathing, casting a local cool around a bench. Porches are agreements between rain and the threshold. They are deep enough that a visitor can stand and shake cloak or umbrella without baptizing the entry, tall enough to keep air from going stale, open enough at the sides that splashed rain can fall away instead of seeking the house. Posts are set on stone feet so that their bases do not wick and rot, and the earthen wall behind a porch is finished in a slightly denser lime coat, the place most likely to be pressed by shoulders and baskets. The floor slopes the shyest amount away from the door. You cannot see the tilt, but a cup of water would wander toward the yard. Hooks live there, for brooms that keep splash aprons neat, for reed screens that can be lowered before a wild squall, for the coil of rope that becomes a clothesline across afternoon shade.